can we assume that if Gutho doesn't get what he wants at Para, they're knocking the door down to sign him at this sort of money? What options does he have?
Well, they've parked the negotiations now until the end of the season because sanity's prevailed. They've realised the last thing they need is a contract storm and furor, especially after the way the negotiations played out with their captain last time. They don't need a month of headlines leading into the finals while their form on the field is also in free fall.
Okay, Hoops, I'm going to ask you, what other club would pay him $1 million?
No, I'm not sure that another club will, Gordon, right? But I'll say this.
800?
Yeah, look, I think if the risk that the Eels now run is that they've parked it until the end of whatever they're going to do in September, but if they can't get a deal done before November the 1st, then other clubs are free to try and table a deal to sign him for 2023. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some other good clubs that would think Clint Gutherson can value add to them.
So what do you reckon Nico Hines signed for? 600?
No, I think certainly for next season.
I thought it was 650.
No.
Yeah, mate, I thought it was 650. That's the price.
Mm.
Do you think Nico Hines is better value?
He's a superstar at the moment on form.
So
That's
there you
the
are.
thing.
So there's the price right there.
I'm with you, Gordon. I see the worst thing Parramatta can do is just say, you know what, we need to get him. We can't lose him and pay this figure to not lose him. But clubs get themselves in problems. Mike Maguire was at the show earlier talking about clubs get themselves in problems when they spend too much on players and they get the value wrong, because that stops you getting other talent in. And so suddenly when your salary cap's all bent out of shape, it's a compounding problem. The more you pay for a Clint Gutherson means you don't have the money in your cap to re-sign, say, a Paulo. Or you might not have it in your cap to go and to sign a Nico Hines if he's on the market. That's where so what ends up happening, and then you start to say, okay, well, we can't lose the players we've got. So you then start to pay them more because you're afraid to lose those guys. And so suddenly that snowball effect, it just gets bigger. And so suddenly you start putting more and more money into into the players already at your club. You should be saving money on players at your club. They should be wanting to stay for a little bit less because they love the experience there. You don't pay them overs to stay. That was where West Tigers continually, that's what the Broncos are doing. Broncos are developing all these kids. They're coming through and then paying overs to keep them at the club. And that they were so stupid with their retention that they actually were trying to justify paying these big dollars to keep clubs who are coming through the juniors, when in fact that's the guys you want to save money on. If there's one model that we're now seeing has to work in the game, is what the Roosters are doing, what Penrith are doing, what Melbourne are doing, is you've got to develop and you've got to bring through a good crop of players. Therefore, you're saving money at that end because you're not you're not paying them overs to bring them to your club. They're already at your club. They've come through from juniors and they're probably earning. Some might be earning 50 grand less, 100 grand less at the most. Like Nico Hines this year, he's a good example. He's going for an enormous pay rise next year, but this year Melbourne are getting full bang for their buck out of him because they developed him and brought him through. And you've got several players doing that. You don't pay overs to keep players at your club. As soon as you start doing that, you're on the fast track to oblivion. That's the fact of it. That's the
arm wrestle that Parramatta are in at the moment. That's how they've got themselves in this situation again with their skipper.
And they've got to maintain discipline there and say, well, this is what we think. What Parramatta have got to do is their recruitment committee have got to identify fair value for what Clint Gutherson is worth. Now, that's a decision they decide on. But they sit there and they will have a window, okay? So let's for example, think at absolute most his worth is $800 a year, $850 a year, whatever your figure is. Say it's $850. You then say to the whoever does the negotiation with his agent, mate, start at $780, but do not cross over $850 because anything worth there, and that's not a reflection of what he is as a player. Every player in the game, even Tom Travojevic, who's currently the best player in the game, They've all got a maximum value that once you exceed that value, you're no longer getting value for money. And the Parramatta got to decide what that is with Gutherson. And the minute they can't negotiate a figure at that price or below, they have to say, mate, it's been great and all the best with your next endeavours, but it's over. We will not resign you for that money. Now, that's the art of negotiation. His manager is going to try and get as much money as he can. That's what his job is to do. Gutherson rightfully wants to get as well paid as he can. That's his job as a professional footballer. But there's a responsibility on the club to not put themselves in a precarious position because they've spent too much on one player. 100,000 more you pay him to keep him is 100,000 you can't use to get someone else. And that's when you start that snowball effect where you can't stay healthy from a club point of view. That's what Melbourne's strength this year. They didn't lose their nerve with Nico Hines and say, you know what, mate, your progression, your improvement as a player is staggering and we're going to offer you this amount. They had a cap in order. They've got it all planned out for the next, I don't know how many years, but certainly the next 2 or 3 years is already all planned out. And they just didn't have the money that Nico Hines is now demanding. They just didn't have that in their cap.
Well, because they also had Ryan Pappenhausen.
Of course.
Yeah.
But they look, if Nico Hines hadn't progressed as well as he had, and if he was only going to be worth $300,000 a year, okay, they could have well have kept him. But when he plays so well now and his value's gone up to $650, they just said, well, mate, there's $350 we just hadn't budgeted on in our salary cap. Therefore, mate, you're going to have to go because we can't do it. They've done the same with Dale Finucane. They've had the discipline to say, mate, we want you here. We love you. Craig Bellamy called Dale Finucane one of the best players he's ever coached. One of the best clubmen he's ever coached. But Dale Finucane's gone to market and is now commanding a figure that Melbourne just hadn't budgeted on in their salary cap. So they've said, mate, you go with our best wishes. That's the conversation Parramatta's got. Now, the art to it, that's the science of it. The art to it is correctly identifying what that's worth. So what's Clint Gutherson? What is fair value for money for Clint Gutherson? If you get that wrong, that's still going to get you into trouble. If you think he's worth $900 and he's only an $800,000 a year player, then you can justify to yourself he's a $900,000 player. But if he's only giving you $800,000 value, then you've done a bad deal. And in the truth, very few people in the game know the difference between 800 and 900,000. And everyone can justify it. Oh, mate, he's worth that. Look what he's done. And they can find a way to justify it. But the good clubs, they get it right. And that's why they're the good clubs.